The ancient galactic legacy slammed humanity in the face with the force of a supernova. Samuel Foster never imagined his archaeology career would place the fate of Earth on his shoulders. But there he was, on planet Zalox, staring at the ruins of the long-dead Denobulan civilization. His team, Doctors Wilson, Chen, Nakamura, and Patel, helped him pry open the hidden sarcophagus. A mummified male Denobulan corpse lay inside. But their eyes were drawn to the glowing metallic cube clutched in its grasp. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Chen said. "The engravings, they're impossibly intricate." Samuel reached for the cube. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the entire chamber shook. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. "This place is coming down. We need to move now," Samuel yelled. They sprinted for the exit, the cube tight in Samuel's grip, as the ancient structure collapsed around them. Barely escaping with their lives, the team caught their breath outside. Strange symbols like celestial constellations were etched into the crumbling walls, a language and patterns Samuel had never encountered in all his studies. Just what had they uncovered? The cube continued, pulsing and glowing. Back at base camp, they worked feverishly to decipher the cryptic symbols. Samuel examined the artifact closely. If this was truly a key to some vast galactic power, he needed to unlock its secrets. For all he knew, this discovery would either revolutionize human understanding of the cosmos or destroy them all, if Messiu said. The cube surged with energy at his touch, as if agreeing. That night, vivid dreams of a sprawling star-spanning empire flooded the minds of Samuel and his team. Denobulan culture, technology, and influence at its height. But something had gone terribly wrong. Some cataclysm had wiped them out and buried their legacy. Were these actual memories? Dire warnings? The Denobulan's final message? Deep beneath Zalox's surface, an ancient defense system stirred to life, detecting the cube's activation. Whoever now possessed the Denobulan Codex would inherit the Empire's mantle, along with all the danger that entailed. Samuel and his team were oblivious to the perils they had just unleashed. Humanity's fate now hinged on unlocking the cube's complete power before the defense system reached them. As the sun breached the horizon, Samuel unzipped his tent, immediately sensing something was off. Stumbling out, he found base camp ransacked. Equipment was scattered everywhere, as if a storm had torn through. Symbols glowed on the ground, carved deep into the dirt. They were similar to the ones on the chamber walls. What the hell happened? Samuel rubbed his eyes, mind still fuzzy with strange dreams of the cube. Dr. Wilson emerged from her tent, hair disheveled. "Where's Chen? His tent is empty." They rousted Nakamura and Patel, who looked equally baffled. With weapons and comms, Wilson and Nakamura headed out to search for their colleague. Samuel and Patel stayed behind, examining the cryptic symbols. "These patterns, I swear I've seen them before," Samuel muttered, the vision still fresh. As they worked, a scene flashed before Samuel's eyes. Mira stood before an army, the cube radiating energy. She faced an unseen foe across a barren battlefield. Weapons fire scorched the sky. The cube was the key to victory, or utter defeat. Samuel shook his head, the visions fading. Hours passed. Wilson and Nakamura returned, grim-faced and without Chen. The camp settled into an uneasy silence as night fell. They discussed their rapidly dwindling options. A pulsing glow appeared, washing out the stars. It grew steadily, an otherworldly searchlight sweeping the landscape. Samuel felt the cube thrumming in his pack. "It's coming for this, we have to run," he shouted, but it was too late. A mechanical colossus emerged from the light, ancient gears grinding. It towered over them, eyes blazing. In a booming voice that resonated in their bones, it spoke an archaic Denobulan tongue. But the message was clear: return the cube or face annihilation. Samuel stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. He dredged up what little he could remember of the Denobulan language from his visions. "Great Guardian, we intend no disrespect or harm. This device, this key, we discovered it by chance. We are willing to return it to its rightful place," Samuel said, his ancient denobulin rusty and halting. The towering mechanical being tilted its head, gears whirring. It spoke again, this time in accented English. "You speak our tongue, human. Interesting. Your words ring true. I sense no deception in you." Samuel breathed a sigh of relief. "Please, tell us more about this key. Why is it so important?" The Guardian's eyes pulsed with a soft light. "The key is one of many, each guarding a vault of our lost history and technology. They were hidden to keep them from our enemy's grasp. The vaults must remain sealed, or else great devastation could befall the galaxy once more." Dr. Patel stepped forward, holding out the glowing cube. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect this knowledge. Show us where the vault is hidden." As the team gathered their gear, a figure stumbled out of the darkness and collapsed at the edge of camp. It was Dr. Chen, his clothing torn and bloody. He mumbled incoherently, eyes wide with terror. "Chen, what happened to you?" Dr. Wilson rushed to his side, checking his injuries. "The darkness, it's alive, it's coming," Chen muttered before slipping into unconsciousness. Samuel and Dr. Nakamura hoisted Chen between them, supporting his weight. The Guardian watched impassively, then turned and strode off into the night. The team hurried after it, casting wary glances at the shadows. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, following the Guardian's glowing form, whispers seemed to echo from the crumbling walls. Shadowy shapes darted at the edges of their vision, always vanishing when they turned to look. The Guardian led them to a hidden cleft in a mountainside, where strange symbols glowed faintly. It placed a mechanical hand on the rock face, and a hidden door rumbled open, revealing a tunnel stretching down into darkness. "The vault awaits," the Guardian intoned. "But be warned, the enemy that destroyed our civilization still lurks in the depths. Tread carefully, humans, for now you carry the burden of our legacy." With those ominous words, the Guardian strode forward into the tunnel. Samuel and the others hesitated for only a moment before following, Chen's weight heavy between them. The darkness swallowed them, and the door ground shut behind them, sealing away the night. The tunnel stretched endlessly into inky blackness, the cold piercing their skin like needles. Frigid air rushed up from the depths, numbing their faces. Only the Guardian's glowing eyes, two pinpricks of light, pushed back the oppressive dark. The team shuffled forward, Chen's limp weight between them, hearts pounding in the deafening silence. Chen suddenly stiffened and convulsed, wrenching free of their grip. He crashed to the ground, limbs thrashing uncontrollably. Black sludge bubbled up his throat, oozing from his mouth and eyes in thick, foul-smelling globs. It pooled around his shuddering form, then surged upward, coalescing into a writhing shadow. The shadow twisted and stretched, towering over them. Malevolent red eyes opened in its amorphous head, fixing on the horrified team. It lunged with surprising speed, razor-sharp tendrils lashing out. The Guardian leaped forward to intercept, metal body screeching as it grappled with the entity. "Run!" it boomed, servos straining. "I'll hold it off." Samuel, Patel, Wilson, and Nakamura sprinted deeper into the tunnel, Chen's agonized screams and the Guardian's metallic roars echoing behind them. The sounds of rending metal and inhuman shrieks followed, spurring them to run faster. Samuel's head throbbed with each pounding step, visions flashing through his mind in disorienting bursts. He saw planets withering under the shadow's touch, great cities crumbling to ash, entire civilizations snuffed out, consumed by the insatiable darkness. The denobulins had fought this abomination and paid the ultimate price. The tunnel split ahead, branching off into two smaller passages. Samuel skidded to a halt, chest heaving. Behind them, the Guardian's battle still raged, metal shrieking and stone shattering. "Which way?" Wilson gasped, clutching a stitch in her side. Samuel squeezed his eyes shut, fighting to make sense of the chaotic visions. A glimmer of clarity broke through, a vast chamber, pulsing with ancient power, their salvation. "Left," he croaked, already staggering down the tunnel. "We have to keep moving." The passage twisted and turned, forcing them to scramble over uneven terrain. The air felt charged with energy, making the hair on their arms stand up. Samuel barely noticed, his mind consumed by the visions of the Denobulans' last stand. The tunnel opened abruptly into a massive cavern, the sudden space disorienting after the claustrophobic passage. Soft blue light suffused the chamber, emanating from the alien devices and structures lining the walls. In the center of it all stood a towering machine, all gleaming metal and pulsing conduits. It thrummed with barely restrained power, the air around it shimmering like a heat haze. Samuel stumbled forward as if in a trance, hand outstretched. "The vault," he whispered. "The key to the Denobulans' legacy." Samuel's trembling fingers brushed the intricate Denobulan control panel. Breathing deep, his eyes fluttered closed as he dredged up every scrap of ancient knowledge seared into his mind. The glyphs glowed under his touch, rearranging into a pattern he recognized. With a sharp twist of his wrist, he slotted the key into the central mechanism. The towering vault shuddered, conduits flaring blinding blue. A deep thrum resonated through the chamber, building in intensity until their teeth chattered. Metal groaned and stone shook as the vault unfolded like a blossoming flower, revealing its glittering heart. A figure coalesced in the air above, limned in shimmering light, the same woman from Samuel's visions, Mira's projection. "The legacy of our people is now yours to bear," she said, voice echoing in the stillness. "Within this vault lies the collective knowledge and might of the Denobulan civilization, weapons to rend the void, shields to hold back the dark, and wisdom to light the path ahead." Samuel's team gaped in awe, the vault's glow playing across their faces. Mira turned to Samuel, eyes blazing. "The key chose you for a reason. It saw within you the strength, the compassion, the indomitable will needed to carry our mantle. But be warned, this power comes at a cost. The devourer, the entity that destroyed us, hungers still, and now it knows you are here." As if summoned, a bone-rattling roar shook the chamber. The Guardian staggered through the entrance, its once gleaming body mangled and sparking. Dark fluid leaked from rents in its metal skin, sizzling where it struck stone. "Here it comes," the Guardian rasped, servos grinding. "You must choose, and quickly." Samuel's team looked to him, eyes wide with fear and desperate hope. The weight of two civilizations settled on his shoulders like a mountain. He thought of Earth, his family, all the billions who had no idea how close they teetered on the brink. If this knowledge could give them a fighting chance? He turned to the vault, jaw set. "We can't let this chance slip away, whatever the risk. We have to try. For everyone back home." Patel nodded grimly. Nakamura and Wilson exchanged a resolute glance, hands white-knuckled on their weapons. Samuel reached for the swirling nexus of knowledge, fingers outstretched. The instant he made contact, searing light exploded through his mind. Power, raw and ancient, roared through his veins like a supernova. Distantly, he heard himself scream. The chamber bucked and heaved, great cracks splitting the stone. A deafening roar shook the air as something massive and terrible slammed against the vault door, warping the metal. The dark entity had arrived. Mira's projection flickered, her voice urgent. "Prepare yourselves, it breaches the outer wards." Samuel wrenched himself away from the nexus, gasping. His mind blazed with newfound knowledge, 1,000 lifetimes of secrets crammed into his skull. He could feel the dark entity's hunger, its rage, an oily blackness clawing at the edges of his thoughts. The Guardian hauled itself upright, sparks jetting from its ravaged frame. "We make our stand here. This abomination cannot be allowed to claim the vault." Samuel staggered to his feet, a plan crystallizing in his mind. A desperate gamble, but their only chance. He pulled a strange device from the vault's depths, all harsh angles and thrumming power. "I have an idea," he croaked, voice raw, "but I need all of you to buy me time." The team exchanged grim nods, readying their weapons. The vault door shuddered under another tremendous blow, hinges shrieking, cracks radiated across its surface like spiderwebs. Nakamura and Wilson took up positions on either side of the door, rifles trained on the buckling metal. Patel crouched behind a jutting spar of stone, sighting down her weapon's barrel. The Guardian planted itself before them, battered but unbowed. Samuel hunched over the strange device, fingers flying across its surface as he poured everything he'd learned into its modification. Just a little more time. With a tortured scream of rending metal, the vault door burst inward, and the nightmare poured through. A torrent of alien knowledge slammed into Samuel's mind, threatening to sweep away his sanity. He clung to the vault, muscles locked, as the searing stream of data poured into his brain. Weapons that could shatter planets, defenses that could turn back armadas, the cumulative might of an empire long deed, all crammed into his skull in a blinding instant. Through the deluge, a glimmer of hope emerged. Denobulan outposts, scattered like seeds across the galaxy, each one a trove of the civilization's military legacy. If they could reach one, activate its ancient defenses, maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance against the nightmare nipping at their heels. "Samuel!" Patel's shout cut through the mental maelstrom. "The Guardian says we need to move now." Samuel wrenched himself away from the vault, head throbbing. The chamber shook around them, dust raining from the ceiling as something immense battered at the walls. The dark entity, drawn by the vault's power, was breaking through. The team fled, following the limping Guardian through the crumbling tunnels. Oily shadows seeped from the cracks, grasping tendrils that whipped and clawed at their heels. They ran, lungs burning, the entity's hungry roar echoing behind them. They burst from the mountain into a scene of devastation. The base camp lay in ruins, tents shredded and equipment smashed. The dark entity's presence hung over the destruction like a shroud. "Salvage what you can," Samuel rasped, "and get to the ship. We're getting off this rock." They scavenged hastily, stuffing supplies into battered packs. Wilson hauled a groaning Chen aboard, while Nakamura fired up the engines. As the dark entity boiled out of the mountain, a seething tide of malevolence, they rocketed into the sky, the planet's surface falling away beneath them. Samuel slumped in his seat, the vault's knowledge still searing through his mind. He saw the Denobulan outposts, glittering beacons of hope amidst the void. One in particular called to him, a remote world on the fringes of uncharted space. Something told him that was where they needed to go. "Set a course for these coordinates," he told Patel, fingers flying over the nav console, "and pray we get there in time." The ship tore a hole in reality, stars stretching into glowing lines as they plunged into hyperspace. Samuel closed his eyes, letting the vault's knowledge wash over him once more. Amid the whirl of schematics and battle plans, a dark truth took shape. The entity that pursued them, that had destroyed the Denobulans, it was no mere monster. It was a manifestation of something far older and more terrible, a malevolent intelligence from beyond the veil of reality. It consumed civilizations, feeding on their psychic emanations, growing stronger with each world it devoured. The Denobulans had fought it and failed. Now that burden fell to Samuel and his team. The fate of the galaxy hinged on their actions in the coming hours. The ship shuddered, consoles beeping in alarm. Samuel's eyes snapped open to see a lifeless husk of a world looming before them, all cracked ochre plains and jagged obsidian mountains. The Denobulan outpost. "I'm not detecting any energy signatures," Nakamura said, frowning at the sensors. "Are you sure this is—" The ship lurched sickeningly, alarms blaring. Gravity clawed at them, yanking the small craft out of orbit. They plummeted towards the desolate surface, hull groaning under the strain. "Brace for impact," Patel shouted, fighting with the controls. Samuel gripped his harness, the planet's barren landscape filling the view screen. The outpost had to be down there somewhere, buried beneath the dead rock. If they could reach it, if the weapons were still operational. A mountain range rushed up to meet them, knife-edged peaks scraping the belly of the ship. Metal screamed and sparks flew. Samuel's head slammed into the bulkhead, stars exploding across his vision. Then with a bone-jarring crunch, they hit the ground and everything went black. Samuel wrestled with the controls, the spacecraft bucking and shuddering as it plummeted through the planet's thin atmosphere. Alarms blared and warning lights flashed across the control panel. Patel and Nakamura clung to their seats, faces pale. Wilson and Chen, strapped into the rear of the craft, shouted over the din. With a Herculean effort, Samuel managed to level out their descent mere moments before impact. The ship hit the ground hard, skidding across the barren landscape in a shower of sparks and dust. The hull groaned under the strain, but held together. As the dust settled, the team stumbled out of the battered craft, coughing and blinking in the harsh light. They found themselves standing in the midst of an ancient battlefield, the ground littered with the twisted remains of Denobulan war machines and the fossilized skeletons of long-dead warriors. The air was thin and acrid, tinged with the scent of decay. "This way," Samuel said, his voice hoarse. The knowledge from the vault pulsed in his mind, guiding his steps. The outpost is beneath the surface. They picked their way through the debris field, the Guardian limping along behind them, its damaged frame whirring and clicking. At the base of a towering cliff, Samuel found what he was looking for, a hidden door, nearly invisible against the rock face. He placed his hand on a small circular panel, and the door slid open with a hiss of stale air. The team descended into the depths of the outpost, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, their breath misting in front of their faces. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, pulsing with a faint, sickly light. "I don't like this," Nakamura muttered, his hand tight on his weapon. "It feels wrong." Samuel barely heard him, his attention focused on the complex layout unfolding in his mind's eye. They passed through cavernous chambers filled with dormant machinery, the purpose of which he could only guess at. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for millennia. At the heart of the outpost, they found what they were looking for. The central power core, a massive sphere of pulsing energy suspended in a web of conduits and cables. Samuel approached the control panel, his fingers flying over the alien symbols as he worked to bring the systems online. Behind him, the rest of the team fanned out, searching for anything that could aid in their fight against the dark entity. Wilson and Patel rummaged through the remains of what looked like an armory, while Nakamura and Chen examined a row of stasis pods, their occupants long since turned to dust. Unbeknownst to them, a dark presence was seeping into the outpost, tendrils of malevolent energy snaking through the ancient systems. In the depths of the facility, the bones of the fallen Denobulan warriors began to stir, animated by an unholy power. As Samuel initiated the power core's activation sequence, a deep, resonant hum filled the chamber. Lights flickered to life, illuminating the long-dormant machinery. But something was wrong. The systems were sluggish, unresponsive. He realized with a sinking feeling that the power core was failing, drained by millennia of disuse. Her scream echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of weapons fire. Samuel spun around to see Patel and Wilson sprinting into the chamber, their faces pale with terror. "We've got company," Patel shouted, her voice shaking. "The dead, they're coming back to life." Samuel's blood ran cold as he saw the shambling figures lurching into the room, their skeletal forms wrapped in the tattered remains of ancient armor. Their eye sockets glowed with a sickly green light, and their jaws hung open in silent screams. The team opened fire, energy bolts tearing through the air. The reanimated warriors kept coming, shrugging off the hits with unnatural resilience. They closed in, bony fingers grasping for the living. Samuel turned back to the control panel, his heart pounding. He had to get the weapon systems online, had to find a way to repel the dark entity before it was too late. But as he delved into the system's code, he realized the truth. The outpost's power core was too weak, drained by the ravages of time. It could never provide enough energy to power the primary defense mechanism. His gaze fell on the Guardian, the massive machine standing silent and unmoving amidst the chaos. In a flash of inspiration, he remembered the miniaturized fusion reactor contained within its mechanical body, a power source far beyond anything the outpost could muster. Samuel hesitated, his hand hovering over the control panel. To use the Guardian's reactor would be to sacrifice the ancient machine, their only guide in this nightmare. But as he watched his team fighting for their lives against the relentless horde, he knew there was no choice. With a heavy heart, he initiated the transfer sequence, routing the Guardian's power to the outpost's weapon systems. The machine shuddered, its eyes flickering as the energy drained from its body. The chamber shook as the weapon powered up, ancient mechanisms groaning to life. Samuel watched the readouts climb, praying it would be enough. The dark entity was closing in, its presence like a physical weight pressing down on them. The reanimated warriors surged forward, their numbers overwhelming. The team fell back, fighting every step of the way. They formed a tight circle around the control panel, determined to buy Samuel the time he needed. But the horde kept coming, an endless tide of grasping, clawing horror. One by one, the team's weapons fell silent, their energy cells drained. They fought on with fists and feet, desperate and unyielding. Samuel's fingers flew over the controls, the weapon's power levels rising with agonizing slowness. Just a little more time, a little more power. The chamber door burst open, and the dark entity poured in like a flood of living shadow. It swirled around the room, tendrils lashing out to ensnare the living. The team's screams mingled with the roar of the weapon powering up. Samuel locked eyes with Wilson across the room, saw the determination and fear warring in her face. She gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of what had to be done. He turned back to the control panel, hand poised over the final activation switch. The weapon was ready, its power levels off the scale. It was now or never. As the dark entity bore down on them, Samuel slammed his hand down on the switch, a wordless cry torn from his throat. The world exploded in a blaze of searing white light. The Guardian's eyes flickered, its voice filled with grim resolve. The weapon needs more power than the outpost can provide, but my reactor can give it the boost it needs. I was built to defend against this darkness. Saving your species is worth my existence. Samuel's chest tightened. The Guardian had become more than a guide, almost a friend. But with the hordes bearing down and the entity's malice pressing in, he knew there was no choice. He nodded, throat tight. Your sacrifice won't be forgotten. I swear it. Patel, Wilson, and Nakamura formed a defensive perimeter, energy weapons crackling. The reanimated denobulan corpses closed in, skeletal hands grasping. Samuel and the Guardian raced to the power core, the towering machine's heart. Samuel interfaced with the ancient systems, mind whirling, with esoteric denobulan technical knowledge. Conduits snaked out at his command, jacking into the Guardian's armored torso. The connection process was maddeningly delicate. Samuel's hands flew over the controls, routing the arcane power flows. One mistake, one misaligned circuit, and the weapon would never fire. The Guardian's reactor thrummed, its housing beginning to glow cherry red. Power surged through the makeshift link into the weapon's capacitors. Ancient indicators stirred, charge levels ticking upward. Behind them, inhuman screeches and flashes of weapon fire marked the team's desperate stand. The entity's presence seeped through the chamber, an oily smoke that scratched at the edges of thought. Grotesque fusions of flesh and metal clawed their way out of the shadows, products of the entity's foul corruption. The team's shots burned through rotting flesh, but the horde pressed forward. Samuel sank deeper into the denobulan systems, letting instinct guide his hands. The weapon's charge crept higher, painfully slow. The Guardian trembled as power ripped through it. Reactor pushed far past limits. Armor plates buckled, internal components sparking and fusing. Reroute power from auxiliary systems, Samuel shouted over the din. Divert everything to the primary capacitor. The Guardian complied, its voice distorted with static. Lights dimmed, the outpost shuddering as every scrap of energy poured into the weapon. The monster hammered at the chamber walls, stone cracking under the assault. They were out of time. Blazing streams of plasma stitched through the horde as Samuel took control of the outpost's defense turrets. Reanimated warriors exploded into flames, but more surged forward to take their place. A tide of writhing monstrosity, driven by the entity's insatiable hunger. The weapon's charge hit critical, the chamber awash in actinic light. The Guardian convulsed, reactor containment failing. Its voice crackled over the comm, laced with static. "So initiating firing sequence. It has been an honor. Samuel, there is one last thing you must know." The Guardian's final words nearly lost in the chaos. It spoke of a hidden Denobulan shipyard, a fleet of mighty warships locked in stasis. A final hope to turn the tide against the darkness. The location seared into Samuel's mind, even as the Guardian crumbled, its reactor consuming itself. The weapon unleashed a searing lance of pure energy, the beam punching through the chamber roof and into the sky. It speared the heart of the dark entity, a bloated mass of shadows hovering above. The entity screamed, a psychic wail that drove the team to their knees. The beam cut through its essence, scattering it to the void. But even as the entity dissipated, Samuel knew this was only a temporary victory. The Guardian's sacrifice had bought them precious time, nothing more. The entity would reform, and the hunt would begin anew. But now, armed with the knowledge of the shipyard, they had a chance to fight back. Samuel staggered to his feet, the outpost collapsing around them. Patel hauled Wilson up while Nakamura supported a badly wounded Chen. They limped back to their battered ship, the weight of the Guardian's loss heavy on their shoulders. As they broke atmosphere, Samuel gazed out at the stars, the coordinates of the hidden shipyard burning in his mind. The fight was far from over, but with the legacy of the Denobulans as their guide, humanity just might stand a chance. The ship tore a hole through reality, jumping into the swirling embrace of hyperspace, towards a destiny that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The searing beam ripped through the dark entity, blinding illumination slicing through twisting shadow. An unearthly shriek ripped through the outpost, reverberating in their bones. The abomination recoiled, its form shredding under the onslaught. Oily ichor splattered the walls as the entity withdrew, fleeing into the depths. Samuel sagged against the control panel, gasping for breath. Around him, the reanimated horrors collapsed like puppets with cut strings, dissolving into puddles of foul-smelling sludge. The team stumbled from cover, eyes wide. "Is it dead?" Patel asked, voice shaking. Samuel shook his head grimly. "Wounded, but not gone. We bought ourselves a reprieve, nothing more." They limped back to the surface, leaning on each other for support. Emerging into the ruddy light, they found a scene from a fever dream. The barren rock pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, bulbous growths throbbing in vile shades of green and purple. The entity's taint, an infection spreading through the planet's corpse. "We can't stay here," Wilson said, eyeing the twisted landscape with revulsion. "That thing's corruption is everywhere." Samuel nodded, his mind whirling with the knowledge gleaned from the Guardian's sacrifice. The shipyard, last bastion of Denobulan might. A desperate chance. He herded the shell-shocked team back to their battered ship, ignoring the exhaustion dragging at his limbs. They broke atmosphere to a horrifying vista. The entity's darkness spread before them, a churning tide of shadow consuming world after helpless world, planets withered in its grip, vibrant biospheres reduced to ashen husks. Samuel input the shipyard's coordinates with trembling fingers. The navigation screen flickered, distorted by the entity's psychic miasma. They plunged into the twisted space-time left in the abomination's wake. Shapes gibbered at the edges of sight, fleeting glimpses of nightmarish vistas. Patel jerked in her seat, eyes wide and unseeing. Wilson clawed at his face, nails drawing blood. The entity's influence pressed against their minds, seeking cracks to pour itself into. "Hurts in my head," Nakamura screamed, voice cracking, clawing, whispering. Samuel gritted his teeth, drawing on the reserves of knowledge buried in his psyche. He threw up mental walls, shielding his team as best he could. The pressure grew, an ice pick boring behind his eyes. Blood trickled from his nose, each breath ragged. The void beyond the view screen rippled, a membranous shimmer that made their eyes water. The entity's presence coiled around them, probing, hungry. Their deepest shames and darkest fears bubbled to the surface, laid bare by the questing tendrils. Patel sobbed, confronting some private horror. Wilson huddled in his seat, mumbling frantic denials, each mind a fortress under siege, walls crumbling. Samuel poured everything he had into maintaining the fragile psychic barriers, a lone candle against the looming dark. The shipyard's coordinates pulsed on the screen, a faltering lifeline. Samuel clung to them like a drowning man, a fixed point to guide them through the howling madness. Time lost meaning, each second an eternity of clawing dread. With a sickening lurch, they tore free of the entity's poisoned space. A dense nebula loomed before them, a roiling mass of sickly hues and distorted currents. At its heart, a vast structure of pitted metal and scintillating energy fields. The Denobulan shipyard, an island of order amid the chaos. But even from a distance, the corruption was evident. Veins of blight pulsed across the shipyard's surface, the entity's touch already at work. Samuel sagged back in his chair, head pounding. The team slumped in their restraints, drained and shaken. The shipyard filled the view screen, ancient and ominous. Within its halls lay their only hope of salvation, or the seeds of their final defeat. The team's battered spacecraft shuddered as it docked with the ancient Denobulan shipyard. The airlock hissed open, revealing a nightmarish scene. The once gleaming corridors were now a twisted mess of warped metal and pulsing, diseased light. The same sickly bioluminescence that covered the shipyard's hull had infected its very bones. Samuel stepped forward, the vault's knowledge a throbbing pressure behind his eyes. "This way," he said, his voice strained. "The control room is at the heart of the station." They moved cautiously through the deformed halls, weapons at the ready. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the hum of corrupted machinery. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, shapes that scuttled and chittered in the darkness. A scream tore through the silence. Patel, bringing up the rear, stumbled back as a grotesque figure lunged from the shadows. It was a Denobulan, or had been once. Now, its body was a fusion of flesh and metal, twisted into a monstrous parody of life. Its eyes blazed with the same sickly light that pulsed through the walls. Wilson opened fire, energy bolts ripping into the creature's misshapen flesh. It shrieked, a sound that was half agony, half rage, and charged forward. More of the abominations emerged from the darkness, a shambling horde of nightmares. The team fought for every inch, blasting and hacking their way through the tide of corrupted Denobulans. Samuel led the charge, the vault's knowledge guiding his steps and his aim. But for every monstrosity they cut down, two more seemed to take its place, an endless wave of horror. By the time they reached the control room, they were battered and bleeding, their minds and bodies pushed to the brink. The door shuddered open, revealing a cavernous space filled with pulsing conduits and flickering screens, and at its center, a swirling mass of darkness that coiled and writhed like a living thing. "You have come far, little creatures," the entity spoke, its voice 1,000 whispers scraped raw. "But in the end you are just motes in the cosmic dark. Join with me and taste eternity." Samuel stepped forward, his eyes blazing with the vault's power. "We'll never join you," he spat. "We'll fight you to the end." The entity laughed, a sound that made their bones ache. "Then watch as I consume your precious galaxy, one world at a time." The screens flared to life, showing the shipyard's fleet awakening, ancient weapons powering up. Samuel felt the entity's triumph, a black joy that threatened to swallow him whole. He staggered to the control panel, fingers flying over the keys. The vault's knowledge burned through him, showing him the way. The shipyard's power core, a miniature sun at the heart of the station. If he could overload it, trigger a meltdown. "What are you doing?" Wilson shouted over the rising whine of the engines. "Ending this," Samuel said, his voice barely human. "Get back to the ship, get out of here." "We're not leaving you," Patel cried, but Nakamura was already dragging her away, understanding dawning in his eyes. Samuel worked frantically, rerouting power, disabling safeguards. The entity screamed in his mind, a sound of rage and fear. He pushed back with everything he had, holding the darkness at bay for a precious few seconds. The core reached critical mass, a searing brightness that burned away the shadows. Samuel felt the vault's knowledge slipping away, consumed by the light. In that final, blinding moment, he saw the truth of the Denobulan legacy, the endless cycle of destruction that had claimed them all. "No more," he whispered as the shipyard tore itself apart around him. "The cycle ends here." The team barely made it to the ship, the shockwave nipping at their heels as they blasted away from the exploding shipyard. They watched in silence as the ancient structure shattered into a million pieces, a bright new star blooming in the void. "He did it," Nakamura said softly. "He broke the cycle." But even as they spoke, they could see the darkness spreading, the entity's corruption staining the stars. The fight was far from over. They set course for Earth, a heavy weight settling on their shoulders. They had to warn humanity, had to find a way to stop the entity before it consumed everything. In the silence of the void, they mourned their fallen friend and steeled themselves for the battles to come. The galaxy darkened around them, an encroaching wave of corruption that threatened to swallow all light. But in their hearts, a flicker of hope still burned, a flame that refused to be extinguished. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.